Welcome to the Stepmom Side with Alicia Crasco, the podcast for stepmoms ready to create the life they want and one they actually have a say in. Here we talk all things stepmom life and just a little bit more. Leave the superficial conversations at the door and get ready for perspective shifts and actionable advice to help you on your way to creating the life you want, one step at a time. Hi, Jessica. Welcome back to the podcast. You're the first person I've had on, as a repeat guest. I'm super excited.
Me too. I can't wait to talk about EMDR today.
Oh my gosh. Okay,
My
so
topic.
tell me EMDR, what is this? What are we talking about? What is it?
Okay, so EMDR stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. It's a form of therapy. So basically what happens, I might go a little all over the place with this. I'm going to try to stay
Perfect.
really
I'm here for
structured
it.
here. Okay, so while you're sleeping, if you've ever watched a person sleep, okay, their eyes are moving back and forth underneath their eyelids. Okay, that is the brain. It's very simplified, like the two sides of the brain communicating with one another. So if you've ever seen the movie Inside Out,
Yeah.
um, it is a beautiful picture of how this happens in the brain. Okay,
And
so
Inside Out 2 comes out on Thursday.
I know I'm super pumped about it. My kids have even been asking, when does that movie come out?
Mine too. Mine too.
Um, so our brain is pruning and creating connections and sorting our memories and all of that stuff and trying to make sense of what we've experienced. So this primarily happens when we're sleeping. It does happen when we're awake too. But a lot of it happens when we're sleeping, which is why I'm very focused on sleep in
Yeah.
what I do. But so with EMDR, we use that same process that the brain naturally does with eye movements. So in a session where we're processing, we would have the person follow our fingers back and forth like you would do at a doctor's office when they're checking um, like how the brain is working. That's one test
Wait.
for.
Okay, so when you're moving your fingers back and forth, you can tell just by the way that somebody's eyes move, how their brain is working, if it's okay or not.
So what that is doing is helping the brain process. I don't check to see is the brain doing what it needs to do, but I mean medical providers have ways to check like if the eyes twitch
Okay.
or this is one of the tests for sobriety,
Yeah, for sure.
if the eye can't follow. So what
Oh, that
it's
explains why. Okay.
yeah, so we're getting the brain engaged. Both sides of the body are engaged, so the brain can process through this information. So we'll go back and go through memories. This is the reprocessing. We'll activate a memory, reprocess through it so that you see it differently. It doesn't change your memory. It's not nothing. It's not like this woo-woo, nothing crazy's happening. It's just rethinking the way that you saw yourself in that moment.
Okay.
Um, so, to give an example, I'll give a personal example. You know what? First, let me explain one other thing before I get into the example. So, the reason that we do this is every person in the entire world has something negative they've been believing about themselves. Most of us have more than one, but everybody's got one that's like the core, we call it the negative core belief. Okay.
Okay.
So, typically those started way back before the age of 5. So, some of us can kind of pinpoint. I remember the first time that I thought this thought or believed this thing about myself, but not always. Sometimes it was, before we had language, and sometimes it was even in utero. So, all of those connections in the brain were being created, and we may not have a verbal memory of something happening, but we know that there's something there. So, this negative belief can really get in the way. So, if I have a negative belief of, say, I'm bad, then I'm going to view myself through that in anything that I do. So, if I mess up, it's because I'm bad, not
Hmm.
because I'm human, and humans mess up.
Hmm.
So, what we're doing is figuring out what is the negative core belief that this person is holding. And we're going to go back and reprocess those memories and insert a positive belief instead. So they choose, if my negative belief is I'm bad, what would I rather believe? I'm okay as I am, or I'm as good as I can be, things like that. We don't want to
I like
lie.
that it's not a complete opposite.
Yeah, and you don't want to lie, because that our mind isn't going to let us do that. So say, my belief is I'm bad, and instead we're going to try to insert I'm perfect. Well, we know that that's not true. So it's not
Yeah.
going to work. But we want to get something that is similar, but not, um, it has to make sense, you know? So, so I'll give a little bit of an example of this, for me personally. So when I went through this and, part of the reason that I got hooked on EMDR. Um, So I remember very clearly when I was really little, I used to go with my dad and we would ride to get the paper. It's in a town really far away. So this was like our time. We would go and we'd go out to eat and we'd talk and I'd sleep in the car on the way back because it was really late. But then when I went to school, I couldn't do that anymore because I was in kindergarten and it gets late and you can't do that. So my sister got to go instead. Now, my little 5-year-old mind didn't think about that stuff. Like, it's late. I have school the next day. I wanted to hang out with my friends. I didn't think about that. I just thought, oh, he loves my sister more than me.
Oh, yeah.
Because that's what a 5-year-old brain does, right?
Okay.
Now, logically, as a grown-up, I know that's not true, but that doesn't mean that that feeling wasn't still there and that belief wasn't still there. So then any little thing that happened along the way is now feeding this belief that I've started.
Hmm.
um, my dad did nothing wrong. This wasn't a trauma. It was just something that happened that was a very normal in life. But the way that I interpreted that and what that meant about myself changed the way I saw things.
Yeah.
So we all do this. Now, when there is a big trauma, that's definitely going to create something, right? Now, a person could process through that trauma and be okay and not carry that belief with them, but there is something there that was there. And with EMDR, a lot of times when we're working through trauma, it is the belief that is connected to that trauma.
Okay. Can you talk to me the difference between an actual trauma? Because I feel like that's a buzzword that everyone like uses,
Hmm.
right? Like I see your face, and so I know
Yeah.
you know, right? Because this is your profession. But like, what actually constitutes as a trauma?
So if we go by what the DSM says, for a diagnosis of like post-traumatic stress disorder, it is something that is life-threatening.
Okay.
Um, okay, now this can be somewhat subjective too, because I can feel as if I was in danger
Yeah.
and I was not, right? That doesn't really matter. If it felt life-threatening to me, it's going to be traumatic.
Hmm.
Um, so now, yeah, you're right. Now the word trauma gets thrown around like, I failed my test and I'm traumatized. I even do this sometimes. I'll say
Right.
like,
Yeah.
oh, traumatized from that.
Yeah.
Um, but that isn't trauma, that's stress, right?
Yeah.
So, um, there can be really high levels of stress, and you can have symptoms of something like post-traumatic stress disorder from very high levels of stress too. It doesn't necessarily have to be that this was life-threatening. Um, but this is something that I work with a lot in educating and with my clients is like